some movies, some action movies. There's a list on Letterboxd. You can go check it out. I'm gonna backtrack, though. We did 4 last week, and I found the rhythm helps if I do maybe 4 and then 1, and then not 4 again like I was going to do this week. But also, so the list is incomplete. This is something that's built right into the title. I've hedged my bets. It's also possibly always incomplete. Any list could be considered so, but mine especially. So I did notice that I had especially incompleted it by way of some very worthwhile contributions that came about in the genre from some people of color. So I wanted to correct that issue, and I'm going to do it this week with The Black Dragon's Revenge from 1975. So this isn't maybe the first instance, again, speaking of Kung Fu and how it kind of exploded in some of those, well, all throughout the US, but especially in some of those grindhouse theaters that I hinted at last week. The internet is careful to point out that Cleopatra Jones was maybe the first-ish instance of them injecting some Kung Fu into that. And actually, I did watch Cleopatra Jones as well for, okay, not necessarily for this. It's definitely an early blaxploitation film or example of Kung Fu being injected into, but it's not quite what I'm doing here necessarily. As awesome, flat out as Tamara Dobson is, she's not necessarily a martial artist that was cast. She's, I believe, more of a terrific screen presence that was taught some martial arts and does great still. But again, not necessarily where I'm going with this series of videos. Although it does feel like it follows the format of a Kung Fu movie, the way she goes from drug dealer to drug dealer, kind of cleaning house, again, with Kung Fu. Not that there isn't any Kung Fu in this. In fact, she does go to a dojo at one point and recruit some people. But again, it's more flavor. It's kind of a dotted line more than anything. And also, I'll say, strangely enough, for all the authenticity, I guess, I mean, with an asterisk, I cannot speak to authenticity, or the authenticity of blaxploitation films. And of course, the exploitation is right there in the title. So I'm guessing to some degree it's, or can be, a mixed bag. It's a fantastic movie, don't get me wrong. I thoroughly enjoyed Cleopatra Jones, but it does also seem, strangely enough, like a bit of a studio production. Like, she is literally a cop. In fact, she has a license plate on her Corvette that just says, it says Cleo, but above it, it just has to say government as well. So it just feels like some studio intervention there. The cops, for the most part, there's like one really bad one that's quite obviously racist that the other cops look down upon and are like, no, which, I mean, they should, but you know, it's not, especially for the time, it seems like they could have gone a little bit more in the other direction. By the end, one of maybe the best cops does appear to be one of the worst. And I'm trying not to spoil the movie. He's definitely one of the worst. I'm not hedging here, but I'm trying not to spoil this 40, 50-year-old movie. And then also the finale is the brothers and sisters, which they do belong at house, the brothers and sisters house. I'm not just adding that or using it. They save the day. So it's a mixed bag like maybe the genre was itself. But again, don't take my word for it, quite literally. But this is not about Cleopatra Jones, as good as that movie is. And looks also, by the way. I think it's pretty obvious that they hired the talent and gave them some money, as opposed to other movies I could and maybe should be talking about that would fit the mold better, like Black Belt Jones, if you've heard of that movie. It's part of the Jones cinematic universe, I'm going to guess. Probably not, but that was produced in America as well, but takes place in New York, I'm pretty sure, proper. And it features Jim Kelly, who was very much a trained martial artist. People probably recognize him most from Enter the Dragon. He is the black dude from that, but went on to make this with also Robert Klaus, who directed Enter the Dragon. And this is, I guess, in some ways a spiritual successor, but from what I've seen, there's plenty of clips on the internet, as you might imagine, that you can watch. It just doesn't seem like it's really going down that same road, but Jim Kelly is awesome all the same. There's a really cool fight at a car wash that was a blast to watch. So go look that up maybe. But also not doing that movie. I chose the Revenge. I'm sorry. Okay, it does have a couple titles also. The alternate might be more descriptive. The Black Dragon Revenges the Death of Bruce Lee, which I think it's been a while since I've heard the verb form of revenge. But at least for the purposes of this show, we're going to use the Black Dragon's Revenge title. Still having not seen it, by the way, as with most of these. But it did have a few things that stood out, right? So Ron Van Clief is the main, and he is one of the names to come out of the era. He's an actual martial artist from Brooklyn. He won multiple championships and titles, and as his nickname might suggest, was a person of color. And it being a Hong Kong production, I thought maybe we get a little bit of the best of both worlds, which it turns out, yes, it is a Hong Kong production, but I couldn't find a Hong Kong release date. There's a chance this was made for the States, for those grindhouses, straight up from Hong Kong to those theaters. So I wouldn't necessarily quote me on that. Again, most of my info comes from Wikipedia and IMDb, but it looks like this was something very much made for the audience that it played to. But I also chose it because it features one of the more wild stories I could find. It's Ron Van Clief as Ron Van Clief going to Hong Kong to investigate the death of Bruce Lee, a quote-unquote friend of his, which I'm sure maybe their paths quite possibly did cross at some point, but in this movie, he is kind of playing that part. And obviously the answer turns out to be it was a bad kung fu guy somewhere. Okay, also the answer isn't that terribly clear. We'll get more into this, but let's just say for now, not an incredibly tight film, it turns out, but that's the plot. And if you actually go out to IMDb, it's not the plot listed, so don't let that throw you. IMDb says, 3 rival gangs embark on a search for Bruce Lee's handwritten finger fighting manual. Never heard of the manual throughout the movie, unless I blinked, or the subtitles perhaps had some issues here and there, so maybe that was lost in translation, but for the most part, it appears to be about Ron Van Clief and his friend, who I do also want to talk about a lot, going to Hong Kong, investigating the death of Bruce Lee, finding out who basically did it, but also kind of finding out maybe they should let things be. But I wouldn't get hung up on the story, let's say. The action, Ron Van Clief is a screen presence, without a doubt, and he's got the skills, without a doubt. It's well directed, like they backed up the camera enough that it feels like they either saw a Jackie Chan or movie or were participating in some parallel thought as far as that goes, because he is showcased, and turns out much of the other talent is as well. So this is where it really got interesting for me, and it unfortunately maybe took place outside of the film itself. But the moment Xiao Yun gets on screen, it's pretty obvious that she's above and beyond even the people she's working with in many of her scenes. And it turns out that, yes, she was apprenticed to the same master as Jackie and Sammo at the Peking Opera School. Apparently, at some point, she became disillusioned, it seems, with the way work was happening for women that were martial artists. So retired for maybe 20 years before popping up again in Kung Fu Hustle. So we're definitely going to talk about her again. But definitely talented, very talented, and it shows in all of her scenes. And then this happened again with Charles Bonet, who plays kind of the buddy in this, for if it were a buddy. Is it a buddy cop film? It might have buddy cop elements to it, the way Van Clief and Bonet traverse around the city trying to find out who killed Bruce Lee. But again, the moment he gets on screen, very obvious that he has had some training. So in looking him up, this might be one of the even more interesting stories. Turns out he studied with Sensei Eddie Reyes, was where he ended up in 1963 before joining the Marines and continuing with his martial arts. Established his own dojo before appearing in this movie in 1975. In fact, that was probably how they found him. That was how they found a lot of these martial artists back in the day. And Charles Bonet was actually quite possibly the first Hispanic martial artist to appear on film, actually, it turns out. So that was another reason I chose it. He was certainly one of the earliest examples, but he also kind of has one of the best fights in the film. It does a little bit of even storytelling, maybe, or character work, I guess you could say. He gets hit with some poison right in the middle and takes just enough time while dying from the poison to take off his jacket, posture, and then finish the fight in one way or another. So again, some really accomplished actors with some really cool stories in a movie that has a pretty darn good final 15 minutes, I'd say. And the rest of it's, I mean, I wouldn't have watched it. Okay, that's not just to say I wouldn't have watched it if it wasn't watchable. I have not stuck with some films that are especially bad, so this is not especially bad, I would say. I mean, are they the best fight scenes we've seen so far? Probably not. Ron Van Clief aside, who again is the real deal. There are some interesting mistakes, it seems like, sometimes. Hong Kong films were known for shooting sometimes at lower frame rates, so then when they actually projected them at 24, they would look a little sped up. Even Jackie did it here and there, but it was always done in a way that if you were really paying attention, you know, look for it, you can probably pick it out, but for the most part, I bet most people couldn't even tell you that was happening. Here you can tell is kind of the thing. So I don't know if that speaks to how they filmed it or just maybe they sped it up in post instead of in camera. I don't know, but you can kind of tell, and it makes some of the scenes look a little bit herky-jerky. In fact, that would be how I would describe perhaps the entirety of the film as herky-jerky in certain ways. It's a bit rough. The scenes have a tendency to end kind of on a dime. Sometimes the music just cuts off out of nowhere. It's a little bit like the only surviving print of this film, and I don't know if this could actually be the case, was one that did show in the grindhouses, and you know, when the projector would eat the film or it would get damaged, they would just, you know, do surgery right then and there. And that's just how it would be from then on out for exhibition. This feels like maybe that was all that was left, and that's what we got for this final print. I don't know, or it was just, you know, it's a rough movie. That happens also. But the dubbing also leaves a little bit to be desired, kind of. And I don't know, mine was an English dub, so there's a good chance this was the Grindhouse dub version of it as well. But there are a few real Resident Evil line reads in there from time to time. So it's an interesting one. Is it a good movie? Yes. Is it the best movie ever made? Absolutely. If you know what you're looking for, and this is one of those. Again, you might do better with an American production like Black Belt Jones to see really how that spirit was translated into the American experience, especially for that time and that place. But you could do a lot worse than the Black Dragon's Revenge, I guess, is the final thought there. So if you've enjoyed any of this, I appreciate it. You're watching this, I appreciate it. You're listening to this, I appreciate it. You can do more of that at Patreon, where we do have a little bit of content that is, I guess you could say, exclusive. But that's also where you will find the different tiers that you can use to throw something in the tip jar, if you would, so I can keep doing these. But if you do, you might also be interested in knowing that next time for this here show, we will do what I spoke of last time. Unless I come up with another one that I toss right in the middle, which I would like, rather than talking about 5 films before the next one I haven't seen coming up, which will be Crippled Avengers. But no, next week's show will quite possibly be about Snake in the Eagle's Shadow, Game of Death. Maybe we'll have our Bruce Lee discussion finally. Enter the Fat Dragon, and 5 Deadly Venoms at the very least. So come back for that, and thanks for being here for this.